Okay, we're recording again now. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for organizing the event for today. Thank you, Scott and Angelo, for being here today. We have students from Lives in Translation, so that's the translation and interpreting program here at Rutgers University, New York. These students are specifically in the Intro to Translation and Interpreting Studies. So at the moment, we are going into using AI. First, we tried translating from scratch, and now it's how can we translate with translation technologies. So I think it's a perfect discussion for where we are in the semester, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Scott and Angelo. I'll share a bit of Scott's background and also Angelo. So Scott has been active in the language industry for 30 years. He was formerly the founder and owner of Advanced Language Translations, a technical translation and localization company, which he established in 1994. In 2015, he sold the company to Morningside Translations, one of the fastest growing language service providers in the US. And most recently, Scott was vice president of Morningside's professional services group, where he focused on onboarding new clients, building the foundation for strong client relationships, and ensuring customer satisfaction. In 2018, he chose to focus his attention to helping others achieve the success he has enjoyed. And also joining us today, we have Angelo Pasal. Ooh, I'm going to say this wrong.
Pasalacqua.
Pasalacqua. There we go. Thank you.
No problem.
Um, and as the founder and CEO of Zin Global, he's on a mission to revolutionize the language industry with AI first technology. Zin Global is an innovative company that leverages AI to create, optimize, and distribute multilingual content at scale. Um, he is also a John Maxwell certified coach, teacher, trainer, and speaker with a passion for empowering and inspiring others to achieve their full potential, and is always eager to learn new skills and explore new domains, as evidenced in recent certifications in prompt engineering for generative AI from LinkedIn. So, thank you so very much to the two of you for joining us today and sharing your expertise in this domain. And of course, welcome Kathleen, who spearheads this initiative and is the chair of ALC Bridge. So thank you so very much. And whoever would like to take it from here.
I think I'm going to let these gentlemen talk, Stephanie. I'm just here to learn. So I think we'll open this morning's discussion with you, Scott.
Oh, thanks, Kathleen. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and thanks for the invitation. I spent a lot of years talking to students about the industry, so this is a great opportunity. So yeah, today's topic is the latest trends in translation technology. But since this culminates a series that the ALC has been presenting to you all spring, I wanted to remind you that about ALC Bridge itself. The Association of Language Companies has a dedicated website and this working group, ALC Bridge, to foster and promote careers in the language industry. And this site's a great resource for all of you. If you are interested in learning more about opportunities in the language industry, I strongly recommend you visit alcbridge.org. There's an active list of possible internships and other job postings from ALC member companies. There are over 200 language service companies represented in the ALC membership. You can easily access internships from the resources section for students. So we have a whole section just for students, and you can learn more about internships there. And there's a very easy online directory of available internships and other career opportunities that you can peruse. And very easy to apply and to reach out to companies that have postings. So please make use of that. But Angelo and I are chomping at the bit to talk about what we love, which is the intersection of language and technology. I think that's for me, and I think I speak also for Angelo. This is kind of the hook. This is the hook for us. You know, we love language, but the technology piece is really the hook for us. How the two interact and how we can use technology to do cool and innovative stuff has been driving my passion for for the industry since the 90s. So as the veteran of the group, I get to look back and tell you a bit about the history. And I can say, other than the time around which I was born in the 1960s, I've lived through pretty much every bit of this technology, as well as Kathleen. We both experienced it from the very early days. But I will mention that language technology actually has a very long history. I mean, theoretically, going back to the Gutenberg Bible, that's language technology, the first printing press. Go back further, clay tablets and writing in cuneiform, that's language technology. So it's just a matter of how far you want to go back and look at the history of human communication. But I'll talk about the 60s, and the Cold War itself drove big initiatives in the government to establish and research machine translation technology as far back as the 60s. So much intelligence information was being gathered from the Soviet Union that the translation of English to Russian was of huge importance, and there was development of early rules-based machine translation. So I'll mention a few different types of machine translation today. The first and oldest being rules-based machine translation. It could do some things well because it was highly repetitive, but not terribly effective, not very flexible, very error-prone, constantly having to be corrected and updated. So it was a start. Jump ahead into the 80s. And we can't forget that personal computing parallels all of this. So much of the language technology we enjoy today really has become accessible thanks to personal computing. So in the background, always think about the rise of personal computers driving a lot of this. But in the 80s, with the ubiquity of word processing applications like WordPerfect, MS Word, and all the oldies, and then the rise of email, think about things that became possible. We could now start, instead of passing paper around, we could start passing around digital files. And we had a means to transport them, which was email, So that's almost getting me into the 90s at this point. But in the 80s and 90s, there was the inception of computer-aided translation, which we really know day to day as translation memory. Translation memory technology, you might have heard some of the names like Trados, MemSource, MemoQ. These are some of the tools that we know today that we still use. Trados is one of the oldest and arose in the late 80s, early 90s out of Germany. And these tools allowed us to start capturing the content that translators produced and reuse it. And this technology is still a cornerstone of the work and the workflows that we support today in translation and localization. There are areas where computer-aided translation, such as translation memory, are not terribly effective, but that's exceedingly rare. It's used across the full spectrum of translation services and localization, and as I said, is a cornerstone. But in the late 90s, think about the rise of something called Babelfish, something that predates most of you. That's mind-blowing to me. But Babelfish was one of the first commercially and online available translation services, machine translation services by Yahoo. And it was the source of a lot of jokes. And it wasn't terribly effective, but it definitely still enabled people to communicate across languages more easily. And for the most part, it was free. So that made it very accessible to people. So jumping into the 2000s, what we start to see is a bit of a plateau of machine translation capability. By this point, something known as statistical machine translation has just started to gain, some foothold in research at the academic level. And there weren't really any commercial systems available. So we kind of enter a somewhat stagnant period for machine translation technology. And in that period, a lot of the focus within industry turned to the World Wide Web itself. One of the catchphrases of the early 2000s was Web 2.0. Everyone was excited about it, even though we had no idea what it meant. And also a lot of focus on connecting systems. How do we connect to websites to translate their content? How do we connect to content management systems to access more content to translate? So in the early 2000s, there's a lot of focus on interconnectivity of systems. And to this day, that's still a very important piece of making more automated workflows and open up access to big stacks of content that need to be translated. A lot of content out there is still, siloed in a way that makes it hard to access. And this is a significant technical hurdle we have to deal with day to day in production. But out of the 2000s emerged some interesting services, important services for the translation industry, namely website localization. So the translation of websites, along with software localization, which now leads to app localization that we, benefit from every day. These are huge services, especially in the gaming industry. Gaming localization is a huge part of the language industry now, probably one of the fastest growing areas. And all based out of the pioneering steps and things that we learned in the early 2000s. So flash forward to the 2010s, your toddlers, statistical machine translation sees some leaps and bounds, not because of the underlying technology itself having improved so much, but more the impact of better processors in the background. So now servers can just churn through a lot more data to improve the statistical outcomes that they're trying to predict in their models. And then also the impact of what we used to call back then big data, which is just now what we call data, Data is everywhere. And in the 2010s, the impact of big data on statistical machine translation had a major impact. And we saw a big jump in the quality of machine translation at this time. But still, it was really error prone and not very cost effective commercially to use unless you committed to very highly customized machine translation engines. And so, companies like Google, Microsoft, eBay, Amazon, they could do that, and they did. And that helped drive the impact for a lot of the smaller players, such as smaller LSPs as well. But again, commercially, it wasn't very viable. So now, since the start of the 2020s and the advent of neural machine translation, we've seen an absolutely exponential improvement in translation quality coming out of machine translation due to the impact of neural networks being used to create language models and what we now call large language models. We can all experience this every day if we use any online tools that use neural machine translation or large language models. And the impact of the technology has gotten so large that it's really upended workflows for most language service companies. The traditional translation, edit, proof, three-step model, which had been used since the days of Gutenberg, is now being upended, finally, and thankfully, I would say, for the industry. But as always, the adoption of these technologies on the commercial side in production, by translation companies is somewhat slow. For smaller companies, the challenge still is access and and a high level of technical expertise needed, specialized technical expertise to really take ownership of this technology. So a lot of smaller companies are grappling with how to actually onboard this technology into their production systems. But many are slowly starting to experiment, which is, I'd say, we're really where we stand, is the age of experimentation. Angela's going to talk a lot more in the balance of this presentation about the impact of AI. But I just wanted to throw out one thing that I thought was interesting, kind of before I hand it over to Angelo. So when I was preparing my slides for this presentation, I thought it'd be cool to have a visual timeline of language technology. I didn't feel like drawing it myself. I'm not much of a graphic artist. So I figured, well, I'll turn to ChatGPT. So I had a somewhat streamlined timeline. As you can see here, my bullets here are a little bit more precise as compared to my previous slide. So I use this as a prompt. I asked ChatGPT-4 to create a graphical representation of the timeline. And I'm going to show you the results. And at first, you know, you might say, very cool. You know, it created a cool graphic, some cool imagery that really captures, if you look closely at the icons used, you know, it captures some of the key things about personal computing. I thought it was cool how it pulled in a Rolodex over here. This, I guess, is a server. You know, some of these icons, they look really technical. I can't tell you what they are. You know, it's a telegraph. So it does a really good job at kind of creating a representation of key technologies. And I thought it important I show this, what DALL-E could create, because it's a perfect metaphor for the status of AI in translation right now. From a distance, this looks awesome. I feel more sorry for the graphic artists than the translators. Let's put it that way. You know, this would have taken a graphic artist hours to put together, pull together the icons to blend them and put them in a single image. But if you look closely at the details, it's absolute gibberish. All right. Some of the dates aren't even numbers. This says 196S. All right. This says IROD Bolivian translation. So I'm just showing this as a metaphor because we've noticed this in translation. The output from a large language model can read really well and it can be super fluent. But when you look more closely and actually do a true revision in which you're comparing the source language to the target language, you start to see big gaps, big deviations in accuracy, and factuality will even suffer. So I thought that was a really funny outcome that I wanted to share with you here. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Angelo and let him talk more about the impact of AI.
Thank you. If you don't mind, could we stay on that slide just for a little bit, and I'll use it to
Sure.
segue into this? Because I think there's a lot of cool things that could be said here. So this is the output from DALL-E, right? DALL-E is a relatively new technology. So one thing I would say is, like you said, it's like standing looking at a painting, right? If you stand from it from like 6 feet away, it resembles what it should, more or less, right? And then when you look closely at it, it's not actually filled with meaning, right? This is also a new technology. Give it 5 years, less than 5 years, and it will probably be at least, you know, triple better, right? And the other thing is exactly what you said, Scott. Like, looking at this image, you don't know what information went into the image. So no one who sees this sees the prompt, right? And they don't know how different this is in terms of information. In fact, it is from the information that went in. So even if this were to look completely accurate, if it had actual numbers and dates, you still wouldn't know if those numbers and dates were the same numbers and dates that were fed into the prompt. And that's one of the critical issues. Until this stuff gets into the same error rate as a calculator, there will always be someone that needs to validate the output of these models compared to the input. And that's basically the takeaway from everything I'm about to say. So we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so the impact of AI and translations. So what I did here was I came up with broadly 3 categories of what artificial intelligence. So like AI is a word that's been around for a while. And what has happened very recently with ChatGPT and things like and stuff like that is a very specific type of AI called generative AI. So it's generating things, creating things. And I have 3 categories of things that generative AI broadly can do, text for our industry. So that's write, translate, and evaluate. And then as an example, I put a prompt, not a very good prompt, but the idea was to be able to communicate, in this presentation, basically what it can do. So for write, given brief, write an article in Spanish. So in this case, so the word brief is in brackets. One of the things you can do when you're writing a prompt is you can infer to a model that a word is like a variable because it can also read and write computer code. So in a larger prompt, the actual information of the brief is held somewhere else. And so by putting it in brackets, you're kind of saying, I'm referring to that. So given brief, write an article in Spanish. That's one example. Another one, translate, of course. That's what this presentation is about. Given brackets, translation memory, term base, and style guide, translate source into Mexican Spanish, where translation memory is a set of information stored elsewhere. A term base is another set of information stored elsewhere. And style guide is another piece of information stored, and source is another piece of information, and the LLM takes everything together, and it follows the instructions, piecing together an output, taking into account available translation memory segments, the term base, the style guide, and of course, the source. And then finally, evaluate. So it can read input, it can read output, and it can compare the two. So in this case, the prompt I wrote was apply DQFMQM, which is it's the name of a very particular type of system for categorizing linguistic errors to segment. So segment is a sentence. Pardon me, I'm not too sure where the students are in knowing like the specifics of translation, but if there's any questions, like what does a word mean or what does something mean, like feel free to ask me, because I did this not knowing exactly. Do they know what a cat tool is? Are they fluent in that? Like all of that. So broadly speaking, LLMs these days can do these 3 things: write, translate, and evaluate. And they can do them to some degree. And we don't know, or nobody knows how well it does any one of these things until you actually check it. And that's an incredibly important thing. The concept of quality control or supervision, or whatever term you want to use based on where you come from or what you're talking about, is central to the application of these tools. All of these tools at the end of the day are just tools for people to use, for translators to use, for interpreters to use. A person uses the tool to make their job or life easier. So a translator or a copywriter would use an LLM to write the content, translate the content, evaluate the content, use this tool, and then judge for themselves the output of the large language model, of the AI model, and then improve it from there. Because usually, almost 100% of the time, there needs to be some kind of adjustment. That's sorry. So that's broadly how you can how AI can be used in translation. I guess we can go to the next slide. If there's no questions on that, we'll just move on to the next slide. Okay, so the impact of AI on interpreting. So interpreting is very different from translation. And in the same way, interpreting projects are very different from translation projects. Translation projects have the luxury of having a little bit of a time delay. A client could ask for a translation on Tuesday and it won't actually start till Wednesday, and that's okay. Interpreting is not like that. Interpreting, if someone needs an interpreter on Tuesday, that interpreter needs to be there on Tuesday and be doing it, right? So interpreting is real time, while translations is not. Interpreting is bi-directional. The information is passing both ways from the speaker and the receiver repeatedly. And then the setting, which is kind of like the context, carries a tremendous amount of weight in passing that information along, because a lot of communication is nonverbal, right? So the interpreter being able to see the people in the conversation helps them tremendously understand the connotation of what's being said, right? In translation, you don't really have that. You have the other words as your context. So how the impact of AI is on interpreting is different from translation. When it comes to the application of AI on interpreting, because the technology has these new limitations of being real time, bi-directional, et cetera, it's a lot higher level of sophistication is required. You can see in my second bullet point there, requires tremendously high throughput processing. In other words, you need to have a lot of information going back and forth very fast. And at this moment, it's not that fast. So we're not there yet. There was a recent survey done by Safe AI that interviewed a lot of stakeholders that use interpreting. So not just interpreters, but also buyers of interpreting services and everything. And the consensus was that if money was not an object, they still much prefer human professional interpreters. And also, given the technology, it is nowhere near where it needs to be to replace a person because of issues like this. It's not fast enough, not enough information is getting across, and therefore, as a whole, it's not a very functional. So in a nutshell, this is the impact of AI on interpreting. Is there anything, Scott or Kathleen, that you want to add?
I don't have any comments right now, Angelo, but we'll be sure that we bring the students in after we've given them our information.
Sure. Okay. Any questions on this slide? Anyone have any particular questions about AI and interpreting? No? Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so since a year or so ago, when generative AI became extremely popular, the most common conversation topic about it is what's going to happen to me and my job? And in the context of this industry, what's going to happen to the language industry? Like all the other technologies that came before it, machine translation, CAT tools, etc., never once did these tools actually replace a person. Yet the same thoughts went through everyone's mind. When CAT tools came out, it was like, oh my God, this thing is going to start reproducing my translations. When machine translation came out, it was, oh my God, this thing's going to start doing the translations without me. Never once did these tools actually replace the translator or interpreter. And the same is going to be true here. At the end of the day, and this is like the central point, these are tools to be used, right? Graphic design tools didn't replace designers. And the list can go on, right? What it does mean is that this continues the trend in our industry that technology becomes more and more a central component to everything we do. And this is not just of the language industry, of course. This is of all industries. There is no running away from this. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. Technology is becoming more and more central to what you do. And in fact, because these technologies can do more and more, the remaining part that still is where people excel the most ends up being in things that don't involve technology, like social skills and selling. And in fact, things like this and the business side in general is where there's a massive gaps in supply. There's a huge demand for the non-technical part of this industry that really needs to be filled, and it's been vacant for a while, and it grows with time. It grows with time because the industry grows with time. The market grows with time. There's more and more translations and interpreting needed year after year. So there's more and more demand, and there's not enough supply, not enough people year over year to fill this. And while everybody is paying attention to technology and what the cool things technology can do are, what people are missing completely is exactly what technology doesn't do. Talk to people. So this is where the massive gaps are. Every year, the ALC does a wonderful industry survey. They reach out to the owners of translation companies. They reach out to the buy side and the sell side. And they ask, what's going on? What do you need? What's the status of your business? What's lacking? Every year, you get a lot of the same answers. We need more people that know how to do stuff like sales, project management. Yes, there's a need for translators and interpreters, but it's actually very nuanced. It's not like any translator, any interpreter has the same amount of need. As you know, in English to Spanish interpreter or translators, they're very different from a French to Chinese, translator or interpreter. There's a totally different market for those two types of linguists. And so it's very difficult to broadly say, we need more translators, we need more interpreters. It really depends on what language you're talking about, what domain you're talking about. So while the need in our industry is for things where you're actually interacting with other people and you're doing the management of it, not the actual translation and interpreting, you still benefit tremendously from having language skills. I want to give one example because I think it does a really good job of explaining it. So like in the language industry, like any other professional services industry, you've got the same stuff. You've got the business side, and then you've got the actual service. So a law firm has lawyers, and the language industry has translators and interpreters, right? That's the very industry-specific part. But everything else is broadly the same. So for example, a salesperson in both industries does broadly the same thing. They try to find business, they engage with prospective buyers, and they close the deal, so to speak, right? A salesperson that knows how translation works, is bilingual, and understands the process firsthand is a much more effective salesperson than a salesperson that has no idea exactly what's going on when a translator translates. And I'm talking about like the cognitive process that the translator goes through, the tools they use, how they engage the tools, right? Maybe the best example is like legal translations, because in legal translations, you're not just translating content from one language to another one. Typically, legal systems vary between countries to the point where a lot of things that happen in one legal system don't even exist in another legal system. So when you're translating, for example, a courtroom case in Korea and you're translating it into English for American lawyers to understand, they're going to be referring to things that the American lawyers have no idea about, right? A simple example might be in the UK, they have something called a barrister in their legal system. It's kind of like a lawyer, but not really. It's called a barrister. So when a lawyer in English, in American English, reads about a barrister, they don't know what a barrister is exactly. How does that apply to their own legal system? So a salesperson talking to a lawyer about potentially being a client to the translation company and selling legal translation services can much better articulate the challenges that come with that and explain how this company that specializes in legal translations can do a much better job in offering translation services than a generic translation company, because they understand these important nuances that happen at the translation level. So language skills are incredibly valuable to have no matter what you do in the language industry, because it helps you understand exactly what's going on, but it's not enough. Is what I would argue. In a lot of times, it could be enough. It could be enough to just know translation and interpreting. But more and more, technology plays a critical role. And because of that, technology tools, technology skills becomes an increasingly bigger role in how a translator or interpreter uses their time and sells to their prospective buyer. Knowing how to use a CAT tool used to be central to how you did your job 10, 15 years ago. 20 years ago, maybe not. Now, these days, if you're not using a CAT tool, you're not a professional, right? And soon, it will be the same thing with machine translation and large language models. If you're a translator or interpreter and you're not using these tools to do your job, you're not competitive at all. When will we be there exactly is very hard to say. It probably really depends on where the buyer is located, the types of demand there are in competing translation companies and interpreting companies, but you want to get a handle on this as soon as possible. These tools allow you to work much faster than before. I have calculated a translator working with MT and LLM can work 4 to 5 times faster. That's 400 to 500% faster. The industry is not growing at 400, 500%. No industry does that, which means that there's going to be more and more work for the linguists that use these tools and less work for the linguists that don't. And that's a really important takeaway. You want to use these tools, get ahead of it, and use it to make more money, like everyone else, and not shy away from this or think that this is the end all be all. There's tremendous opportunity here to use these tools to make more money, but you have to be willing to use them. So in general, language skills is central, but in addition to that, broad technical skills. You don't need to be a developer, but just knowing how to read code, put together an API, how to automate number formatting or formatting in general could be really useful because it saves you a tremendous amount of time. Communication skills are central. That's never going to go away. And unfortunately, as time passes, communication skills are lacking more and more. Just practice talking with the other people is really helpful. And it's very easy to do. It just means don't be in front of the screen, basically. Organizational skills are central to the language industry because most of what happens with any kind of language project is actually the organizational part of it. When a client says they need translations, oftentimes they don't need it in one language, they need it in 10 languages. If they're selling something to Europe, they need it into 32 languages. If you've got 32 languages, that's at least 32 linguists you need, probably 64 linguists that you need. Somebody needs to be managing all those people. That's 64 timelines. That's 138 deadlines, at least, right? Not including the prep work beforehand and the work at the end. So organizational skills are extremely important. When I grew up, no one taught me organizational skills. I had to figure it out on my own. Luckily, I surrounded myself with people that were much better at being organized than me, and I asked them to teach me. And it ended up being rather straightforward, using a to-do list, using a calendar, always keeping things written down and documented so that you can refer back to it whenever you need to, not depending on your memory, things like that. Problem-solving skills are valuable no matter where you go, what you do. Now with AI, people are trying to figure out how can you apply LLMs to their business. That's a problem-solving skill. Figuring out where can you make use of this technology in different ways, not just translation, but in selling, in marketing, in organization, in internal organization in a business in general, is all central to how a business works, and is critical for no matter who you are. And then language business skills. This basically refers to the business of a language company. Each industry works kind of differently. Businesses in general work the same way, right? Money in, product or service out. But understanding the nuances of what that means in each industry is critical. So understanding exactly how are files delivered. Is it sent by email? No, that's not secure. Are we using some kind of secure FTP site, or are we using a client's portal? These sort of things carry a lot of value because when you know how clients work, or when you know how the industry works, when you know how the business works, it gives you a tremendous amount of insight into how to do your job and how to do it successfully. I can't even remember if I have a slide after this.
Nope, you are done, sir.
All right. All right. So we talked about
Brilliant, brilliant.
okay. So we talked about impact of AI on translation, impact of AI on interpreting, and impact of AI on you. Does anyone have any thoughts maybe on what is the most relevant thing to get out of this presentation? Like, what do you want to know? We're talking about AI. We're talking about AI on the language industry, and you're all students that are going to be facing this one way or another.
Stephanie,
Any burning questions?
Stephanie, I think this is a very good time to really ask the students to come on in.
Yes, that would be great. Actually, what we could do is maybe, let's see here. Yes, any students have any questions at all? And maybe we can portion it out. So any questions as to AI and translation? Maybe let's start there. Any questions on that?
Alternatively, if someone has a really strong opinion about AI and what they think it can or can't do, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, Scott, you can close the slides so we can just
Sure.
be brainstorming here a bit. We really do need to hear from you, students.
Or feedback of any kind, you know. Anything interesting?
Well, I'll just chime in and say, I find at this point in most of these presentations I've done, the silence is deafening for a pretty good reason. Because I remember back, I had no clue what I wanted to do after I got my degree, right? The world was the world was my oyster, so to speak, but it was just so wide open. It's overwhelming to decide what path you want to go on. You're fortunate today because, probably back when Kathleen and I started our companies, well, we were company owners. That's a totally different thing. If you want to be an entrepreneur, that's great, but it's also a different life choice. But back in the day, there just weren't that many different types of jobs.
Yeah, arguably, if you're going into translation and interpreting, you've already made that decision because
that's true.
Most translators and interpreters are business owners.
Yeah, if you're going to work independently, you're right. That's a very good point, Angela, that if you're going to work independently, you are an entrepreneur by definition. That's true. But the number of options in terms of careers now has just absolutely exploded. I think that's the greatest impact of the growth of the industry and the technology that we use, is that it's opened up more opportunities for more people.
And the job descriptions we've got, I mean, we have that wonderful Peaks graphic, Stephanie, right? We've shared with the class. And on there are things that, you know, who's ever heard of a solutions architect? What the heck is that, right? And so there are jobs that you guys will be able to fill, that you'll create yourselves, because that's just where we are in time, and it's exciting as heck. So I hope you're going to talk to us a little bit, because we have to learn from you.
What I'll actually do is I'll stop recording right now. I might encourage students to share their thoughts a bit more. So I'll stop
Great.
recording and